This is a review of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the art of the animated series. This book was published in 2010 and covers all 3 seasons, which means they've had to cram 61 episodes into one book, and it sure feels like it, with some episodes literally getting just 1 page. Most get at least 2 though. So while I do unequivocally recommend this book to any fans of the show, one thing you don't want to do is come to it expecting to see everything. You are going to have a ton of moments of, oh, I can't believe they didn't include XYZ, but at the same time, you're going to have just as many, if not more, moments of bliss and fond reminiscences of certain characters, scenes, and episodes. This book will really make you want to go back and rewatch everything, which is a really nice feeling to have, as I consider this series to be. To say it's the greatest cartoon isn't accurate enough. It's the greatest show, story, piece of art, entertainment, media, whatever. This art book is very similar to the Korra ones in its approach. And while I took the Korra ones to task a bit more, I find myself feeling a lot more positive about this book, certainly because of how I feel about the show. So if you are a little skeptical of my praise for this book, I encourage you to also check out the reviews I did for the Korra books, especially book 2, which I think was the most articulate and fair. And just know that a lot of the criticisms I made against those books are also present here. Although objectively, I do genuinely think this Avatar book is superior to the Korra ones for having much more interesting text and being less visually homogeneous. Like most art books published by Dark Horse, it uses nice, thick paper and a larger than average size, which actually kind of saves this book's bacon a couple of times, because despite the fact that, like I said, they are having to distill 61 episodes into 180 pages, they've actually done a really impressive job of putting as many images on each page as possible, which was a real relief to see, as otherwise this book would have just been dead in the water. But for most of these page layouts, if they had have had to fit that onto a smaller sized book, many of the sketches would have been way too small. So this format offering that extra inch or 2 really saves the day in a lot of cases by giving them the ability to balance lots of images while still being able to size them appropriately and no wasted space, which I really appreciate. The curation of the images is really interesting. The emphasis seems to be on a sort of utilitarian style art. So it's not necessarily about showcasing beautiful concept art, but rather this is the art and design work one needs to make an animated series. So often the book does feel a little bit like a making of book via an art book, which, depending on what you like, could be very boring or very interesting. But it's still a valid approach to an art book, and ultimately I'm just really glad they've clearly put a lot of thought into curating their book, which is not something I can say of a lot of art books. My only real criticism of the art presented is that, just like the Korra art books, there are too many facial expression sketches and way too many final models for creatures and characters, which are just pointless and boring. And it's particularly annoying to have that sort of stuff taking up so much space when, again, just like the Korra art books, there's not a whole lot of evolution or development of designs shown, or many alternate or unused ideas. However, for all I know, maybe they do just have very clear ideas for their direction, and the first sketch they put to paper genuinely does closely reflect the final design. But even though a lot of that stuff isn't shown visually, it is absolutely present in the text, which often does have really interesting information about the development of different ideas. In fact, even though I do really like the art in this book, I actually think my favorite part is the text. Again, not something I can say about most art books, which are typically underwhelming when it comes to presenting illuminating text. Now, of course, this is an art book, so there's not a ton, so you can't expect anything comprehensive or particularly deep. But in terms of what is here, it does a much better job than most art books, I find. The text is mostly commentary by creators Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino, no one else though. It might have been nice to hear from some other people involved, but honestly I didn't mind, as this really is their book. They made it, they wrote it, they are the authors. And I just think it's so great to see the creators so heavily involved with an art and making of book, which is a very rare thing. And they just come across as really open and genuine guys. There's absolutely no sense of any of the writing feeling like a PR puff piece. Although, as in the Korra books, Michael does seem to waste too much time just explaining characters and events. The best parts are when they occasionally give these really honest and insightful sections into the history and development of the show, or looking at a specific part of creating it, and always making sure it's specifically relevant to Avatar, which is very important as to why I like the text so much, as it avoids the usual trap most books fall into of discussing the show in a general sense, or even animation in too general a sense. But most of the text is made up of, every few pages there'll be a paragraph of commentary giving genuinely interesting little anecdotes about the creation of a character or an episode or whatever, and they're very open with revealing their inspirations, which is really rare and wonderful to read about. And then lastly, every image is excellently captioned, including artist credits. In fact, the only legitimately awful part about the text is that the foreword to the book is written by, guess who? The director of the live-action Last Airbender movie. So you may be tempted to rip that page out. And I say he's written the foreword, but it's got all the substance of a tweet. So on the whole, I mean, I would never call this an especially amazing book. Despite my insane adoration of the show it's based on, it's still not one of my all-time favorite art books. But they've made some great moves with putting this book together and put a lot of thought and care into it, and it shows, and as a fan, I really appreciate that. Which is why I absolutely encourage any other fans to consider getting it, but as ever, that should mostly be based on whether or not you like the visuals you're seeing as we flip through. In terms of other books to recommend, sadly, this is really the only worthwhile book that's been made for the show. I mean, the comic book continuation for the series is surprisingly well done, despite the fact that Dark Horse has made some serious blunders in their presentation. For more information on that, you can see my review of the library edition I did for the first arc of the comics called The Promise. Then there have also been a few other Avatar-related books like the Chronicles, Lost Scrolls, or the Legacy books, but they're all just completely pointless. But I guess we should be grateful for what we have, because even still today, it's somewhat uncommon for animated shows to even get any sort of art and making of book. And when they do, they're often just so boring with uninspiring art and endless pages of final character models and turnarounds, which is kind of inexplicable when you compare it to animated movies, where they are almost always guaranteed an art book and have a better showcase of art as well. If you want to see a beautiful example of an art book that flies in the face of that sort of crap, definitely check out the review I did for the Art of the Clone Wars animated series, as that is one of the best examples of the type of art that should be showcased in art books for an animated series. Although the layout of this Avatar book is much better than that one, so nothing can be perfect, I guess. And I've already mentioned the Legend of Korra art books, which are actually kind of really interesting in that they got one art book per season, which I'm positive has to be a first for an American animated series. But I feel like they wasted that opportunity, as those books are not nearly as good as this one in terms of visuals or text. So I just wish it could have received the same one book per season treatment. But, like I said, if nothing else, we can be grateful they didn't screw this book up and were able to make a beautiful and fitting tribute to the show, which I'm sure is exactly what they'll do with the Netflix adaptation.